I didn't run. Water gathered on my jacket, tiny drops forming patterns. I didn't try to understand. Cars pass beside me, their tires cutting through shallow reflections, breaking the sky into pieces on the ground. I kept walking at the same pace. There was a time rain felt like an eruption, something to escape from, something inconvenient. But now it felt more like a mission. Permission to move slower. Permission to arrive without urgency. I passed the storefront window, saw my reflection for a second, distorted by the water on the glass. I didn't correct it, I didn't look longer than necessary, just enough to know I was still here. My hands were cold but not uncomfortable, alive in a quiet way. By the time I reached the door, my shoulders were damp, my hair heavier. I stood there before going inside, not delaying, just acknowledging the distance I had crossed. Nothing extraordinary had happened. Still, I wasn't the same person who left earlier. The elevator mirror caught me off guard again. Not because of how I looked, or because I hadn't thought about myself all day. Just moving from one small task to the next without watching it happen. The light above flickered once, then held steady, like it had decided to stay. I leaned back against the wall, felt the quiet vibration under my feet. Each floor passing without ceremony. There was a time I would have checked my phone here, filled the seconds, avoided that empty suspension. But my hand stayed at my side. Someone had left a faint fingerprint on the metal door, half visible in the right angle of light. Proof that someone else had been here before me and left without needing to erase themselves. The elevator stopped, but I didn't step out immediately. Just watch the doors open, watch the space waiting for me. Nothing pulling, nothing pushing. I realized how rare it used to feel to exist without resistance. Not fighting the past, not negotiating with the future. Just standing inside a moment that didn't ask anything from me. Eventually I step forward. I step forward. Not to escape, not to arrive, just to continue. I noticed the sound of my keys before I noticed the door. The small metallic shift in my hand, a familiar weight I hadn't questioned in years. I stood there for a second, not unlocking it yet. The hallway smelled like old wood and detergent. Someone nearby had cooked recently. A faint warmth still lingering in the air. I realized how many times I had passed through this exact moment without ever being inside it. Always thinking about what came next, always halfway somewhere else. I turned the key slowly, felt the mechanism respond. A quiet agreement between movement and result. Inside, everything was exactly as I left it. The chair slightly angled away from the table, the glass on the counter, a crease in the blanket that hadn't moved. Nothing had tried to become anything more. I set my keys down, listened to the sound they made against the surface. Final, certain, enough. There was comfort in that. Not excitement, not relief, just the absence of pressure. I didn't need the room to welcome me, it already had. I walked in, closed the door behind me, and let the world remain outside. I was washing a cup I'd already washed before. tracing the same curve, like repetition itself had weight. Outside, the sky was turning that soft gray, not dark, not light, just undecided. I placed the cup on the counter carefully, as if the sound it made mattered. There was a time I would've rushed past this, called it nothing, called it empty, but it wasn't empty. It was uninterrupted. I leaned against the counter, felt the cool edge cross into my back. My body was here, not ahead of me, not behind, just here. Just here. I thought about how many versions of myself had stood in kitchens like this. Different fears, different expectations, all believing something was missing. But nothing was missing now. The room didn't need to change. I didn't need to change it. The moment was already complete. I turned off the light before leaving, not to end anything, just because it was time.
I stood up slowly, floor steady beneath me, unchanging. Outside, someone was unlocking that bike, that small click of metal finding its place. Ordinary, precise. I realized I didn't need to prepare myself for the day. I was already inside it. No transition, no ceremony,
Just continuation. I walked to the window, closed it gently, not to keep the world out, just to mark that I was awake. I was sitting on the floor without realizing I had chosen it. Back against the wall, legs stretched out in front of me. The room was quiet in that specific afternoon way, where time feels wider, less urgent. My phone was on the table, close enough to reach, far enough to ignore. I could hear someone moving in the apartment next door, a drawer opening, then closing again. It reminded me how close lives exist to each other without ever fully touching. I rested my head back, felt the wall support me without effort. There was nothing I needed to solve, nothing waiting for my decision. Just space. I remembered how exhausting it used to be, carrying expectations I couldn't even name, trying to arrive somewhere undefined. But sitting there on the floor with nothing completed and nothing missing, I realized I had already arrived, not at a destination, but at the absence of needing one. I stayed a little longer, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I didn't need to leave yet.
here. Just hands changing position without permission.
Had been sitting there longer than I thought. Light shifting across the wall, quietly replacing what was there before. My coffee had gone cold beside me. I didn't remember when. I touched the side of the cup, still holding the shape of warmth that wasn't there anymore. There was something honest about that. How things don't announce when they stop being what they were. I used to resist that feeling, try to hold moments past their natural end, but now I let them pass. Outside, someone closed a car door. A solid, familiar sound, then distance again. I realized how much of life exists in between those small signals, not in the events themselves, but in the space that follows them. I stood up slowly, not because I had to, but because stillness had already given me what it needed to. Nothing was missing from the room, and nothing was asking me to stay. I was standing at the crosswalk when the signal turned red. No cars coming, no reason to wait except the light itself. I stayed there anyway. The wind moved through the empty street, carrying that faint city sound that never fully disappears. A plastic bag rolled across the pavement, uncertain, and settled near the curb. I realized how often I had ignored moments like this, walked through them as if they were obstacles instead of spaces. The light stayed red longer than expected. I didn't check the time. I watched the reflection of the signal in a shallow puddle, perfectly still, until a drop of water disturbed it. Small circles forming, then fading into nothing. There was no urgency in it, no need to hold its shape. The light turned green softly, without celebration. I crossed the street at the same pace, not faster, not slower, just present enough to feel the ground There was no urgency in finishing the motion. I closing the jacket slowly, not to protect myself, just to continue the moment asleep. There was nothing dramatic waiting beyond the door, just air, just space, just another sequence of ordinary seconds. I stepped outside, and this time I came with myself. Just a quiet question, forming too late to matter. I stopped walking, looked back. The building stood there exactly as before. No signal, no morning. For a moment I considered returning. Then I noticed something else. My body was intense. There was a time uncertainty like this would have followed me for hours. A small doubt expanding into something larger. But now it stayed small, contained. I listened to the sound of my footsteps as I resumed walking. That soft rhythm between contact and release, each step complete on its own. A bird landed on the wire above me, its weight barely visible in the line, still balanced without effort. I realize not everything needs verification. Control to exist safely. Some things continue without supervision. I kept walking, not because I was sure, but because I trusted the moment enough not to turn around, not to turn around, not to turn around.
down on the stairs without planning to. Just stop halfway between floors.
The light above buzzed softly, the faint electrical sound most people never notice.
My hand rested on the railing, cool metal, worn smooth by years of passing through.
I wasn't tired, just suspended.
Somewhere between where I had been and where I thought I was going.
I could hear distant footsteps below, someone else moving with purpose.
Their pace didn't belong to me.
For once I didn't compare it.
There was no need
To measure my precision against anything else.
I stayed there long enough to feel the stillness settle.
Not empty, not full.
Just honest. I realized how much of my life had been spent
Climbing without looking,
focused on reaching something undefined.
but sitting there halfway. I wasn't behind, I wasn't ahead.
I was exactly where movement had paused.
And that pause didn't need explanation.
Eventually,
I stood up.
not to finish something, just to continue.
Carry
Myself forward.
because I didn't care, but because I didn't need confirmation anymore. Not suddenly, just a slow warmth settling into my skin. I hadn't noticed how cold they were until then. Outside, someone was watering plants on a balcony across the street. The water fell in uneven streams, missing some leaves, soaking others. Nothing precise about it. Still the plant stayed upright. I leaned forward slightly, rested my elbows on my knees. There was nowhere I needed to go yet, no version of the day waiting to begin. Just this quiet overlap between before and after. I watched the light move across the floor, touching objects without asking permission. The chair, the edge of the table, the wall that had seen everything without reacting. I realized how much had changed without visible signs, not in my surroundings, but in how I occupy them. I wasn't trying to escape the moment anymore. I was letting it reach me. I stayed there long enough for the warmth to become familiar, long enough to stop noticing it, long enough to understand. Nothing had forced it to arrive, and nothing needed to force it to stay.
shifted for a second, then returned to its usual stillness. I stayed where I was.
One hand resting on the table, fingers relaxed, not holding anything. There was a time I would have filled this silence immediately. Turned on music, created movement when none existed. But now I let it in me untouched.
Outside, the sky was losing its color slowly. Not dark yet, not light anymore. That quiet transition most people never stop to see. I realized how much of my life had been spent anticipating arrival, waiting for something to begin, something to confirm I was moving forward. But nothing was beginning now, nothing needed to.
My breathing stayed steady, uninterrupted, enough on its own. I didn't need to improve the moment.
I didn't need to interpret it, I just needed to stay inside it.
Long enough to understand it had already accepted me. without thinking about